Research Report. My name is Daniel Vallis, and welcome to our channel. If you look at our event study calendar, you can tell that we are in some very important days right now, coming up right on the threshold of the Peace and Safety anniversary, which means we are in a time we are told to look for when they say peace and safety. And of course, the messages went out over several days, so it's not limited to one day. But we are reaching the 1 year anniversary right now. And we have the biggest full moon since 1948, which is a reminder of something else we need to look at and a sign we were told to look for. And then also on this weekend, Jupiter will be entering Virgo approximately starting the pregnancy pattern. And so we are at a very important time prophetically. There's a lot going on right now, and you don't need me to tell you that the world is getting crazier every single day. The enemy knows what time it is, and they are getting ready to be unrestrained. And again, if we look at our Peace and Safety announced handout just for reference, and we take a look at the events, notice that they're spread out over several days, so we can't point to one specific day that signals it. But definitely on the first day, November 13th, definitely kicked off the rest of the announcements, all these high-level announcements that were very unique and very distinct, even distinct from ones that we're seeing this year. These definitely went above and beyond just because of the number of world leaders that were putting their weight behind these statements and coming together, and even the UN Security Council unanimously putting out the statement too as well, and other high-level announcements of peace and safety that have not been surpassed yet. And these have been very significant, all clustered together in just a few days. And we are now at that anniversary. So there is the expectation that sudden destruction is coming based on what Scripture warns us about. And we've been looking at the Shiloh prophecy, and we've been looking at a border based on Station 2 of the retrograde as defining Judah. And as we always remark, this was the best of our understanding as of November 11th. And that's what we always tell you, because that is true. It's the best of our understanding, and that's what we'll share with you and put on the table as we go forward and as we learn more. We know the border is around here somewhere, and we've talked a lot about the historical artifacts, particularly the Babylonian tablets, and these definitely let us know of the general way that they used to define the borders and that it is around here somewhere. And it's very important to have this ancient perspective, particularly the Babylonian and Chaldean perspective. And I know we've talked about this a lot before, but we really have to understand that everything goes back to the Tower of Babel, the events that happened around there, and what sprung out of the events at the Tower of Babel and Babylon, which got its founding at the same time. To have a proper understanding of prophecy and other events, even what's going on in the world right now, you really have to understand and always keep the perspective of the Tower of Babel and Babylon and the world-changing events that happened then that are still affecting us today. And you will not truly understand what is going on in the world today, especially the mystery of iniquity or prophecy, either the working of Christ. You will not have a best understanding of that if you ignore the Tower of Babel, Babylon, and its influence down throughout history. And in our video series, The Season is the Reason, we talk about how a lot of the mystery occult religions came from Babylon, and particularly the events around Babel and Nimrod. This mark in history really pushed forth the mystery of iniquity from that time point. And to understand what's going on in the world today and what is even commemorated with different holy days, it's all going back to the Tower of Babel. The mystery religions that are still being promoted today have their foundation in the Tower of Babel and what started there at the Tower of Babel. And the best way to get an understanding of what the enemy is doing today is to understand the events of the Tower of Babel and Babylon and how it was the start of the ancient mystery religions and the mystery of iniquity. Because this is what is still going on today behind the scenes. And so when they put out different messaging, to fully understand it, they're messaging what they are still actively promoting. The Tower of Babel effort, the mystery of iniquity. And so to fully understand this, we have to have an ancient perspective. Because the enemy is still using it, history is affected in light of the events that transpired there, and our understanding will be best when we have an ancient perspective, particularly of what happened at the Tower of Babel. And we can understand a lot of the enemy messaging that's going on right now during these particular days. And our understanding is made clearer when we understand that they are getting ready to finally finish their mystery of iniquity work. They know they're about to be unrestrained, and we have a clearer understanding of this when we understand the events of Babylon and the Tower of Babel. All of the enemy messaging is literally from an ancient perspective, because they are promoting an ancient work, the mystery of iniquity that has been at work for thousands of years. And we see so many references of this coming to play and coming together right now at this time. And even with the Black Knight Decoded, mentioning the Sumerian perspective for all of that. They know they're about to be unrestrained. They know their phoenix is about to rise from the ashes. And it's going to usher in their Nimrod type and their Tower of Babel effort, the mystery of iniquity, what it's working toward. All of it goes back to having an ancient perspective. And so not only do we have an ancient perspective with the celestial events and the Chaldean perspective, because that was the gold standard back then, but also understanding the context, the historical context of the times and the individuals that are recorded in prophecy and what was going on, and then also the prophecy and celestial signs that they foretold about from their perspective. And we talked about these particular tablets, the Enuma Elish tablets, and particularly tablet 5 of how it remarked, he founded the station of Nibiru to determine their bounds. And this is what they used to determine the bounds of the constellation and group them together. And so this is what we've been looking at, particularly in light of the Shiloh prophecy, trying to determine exactly where would Abraham, Jacob, Judah, Daniel, where would they have viewed the celestial portion of the sky to be Judah? Where would they view that? And we've looked at a variety of documentation. There is a lot of documentation out there that, yes, definitely Jupiter was used by Babylonians to define the constellations of the zodiac. There's no question about this at all. You can find academic articles, one after another, that talk in general about how Jupiter was used to divide it into the 12 divisions. Even on Wikipedia makes a brief mention of it too. And you also find a lot of talk about how they definitely knew Jupiter's retrograde motion was used to define 10 degrees of arc. It's perfect for that. In between the different retrogrades, that also perfectly forms out 30 degrees. So Jupiter is perfect for dividing the sky into 12 sections. And that's why they used it for that. And then we also talked about how the Bible gave a nod and mentioned 10 degrees with celestial movements in connection with time and in connection with the Chaldeans and in connection with Daniel too as well. And so we know without a doubt that they used Jupiter to determine the boundaries. And it was involved with the retrograde and all that. The question, though, that you'll find when you read through a lot of academic articles, and I've read through a bunch, and they're really boring, but you'll quickly find out that they repeat a very common phrase of they're not exactly sure what the station of Nibiru is. They know Jupiter and the retrograde were involved in dividing the constellations, but there is disagreement on exactly what is the station of Nibiru. For example, on the Encyclopedia Britannica, they mentioned, for example, in one version of the Babylonian theory, Jupiter's onsets of retrograde motion were spaced at regular intervals of 30 degrees. And this is what you'll find in a lot of the academic papers, is they will mention there are multiple ways to interpret what exactly the station of Nibiru is and where that is on the retrograde motion. And so this is one thing that has slowed down my research definitely, is finding out that even from the educated and academic perspective, they are not quite sure. You won't find an overwhelming consensus of what they think that station of Nibiru is, just that it's within the retrograde motion somewhere. And this Encyclopedia Britannica version is actually the first one that I saw, and really the only one that I've seen so far, that they suggest and they point out that one of the theories is that it starts at the onset, the beginning of the retrograde motion. Now, the border that we had been looking at was defined at the ending of the retrograde motion. And when we put this together, I already understood that there was some ambiguity among the different academic sources of exactly where it was. But I also saw a lot of suggestion that the retrograde arc was included within the boundaries. And so that's why I leaned toward the retrograde ending as the border. The end of the retrograde is one theory and application, but like the Encyclopedia Britannica says, the onset, the beginning of the retrograde, is another place where it may have started to as well. He founded the station of Nibiru to determine their bounds. And there are different opinions on this, whether it's the end of the retrograde, whether it was the onset of the retrograde, whether it was Jupiter at opposition, or even some other theories too as well. It's all in that neighborhood somewhere, but there are different opinions. So let's look at the drawing board. There is station 1, that's one option of where the boundary was determined at. Then there's opposition, when Jupiter would be at its brightest. And it would definitely stand out in the night sky, be very bright, obviously. And since Jupiter is the scepter and the lawgiver, being at its brightest would be a very significant point. And that was this year just past on the right of the hind leg right there. And then, of course, station 2. So there's 3 significant stations where the border, based on the different academic theories, could be. with not a lot of consensus exactly pointing toward one over the other. And that has been very confusing, and I'd like to present something stronger, but we haven't been able to find one definite station that is stronger than the others, unfortunately. And of course, at the next retrograde, these exact options will be repeated. So you have one option, which starts at the ending of the retrograde, which is what we picked by default. And of course, Jupiter is moving leftward, it's moving eastward. So then another division option is at opposition, being between those points. And then the third option would be at the onset of retrograde. And so we know the division is in there somewhere, and these are the significant points, and we have just passed station 2, so we've passed the very first option that was even possible, but there's plenty more possibilities in the days ahead, many days ahead actually. The problem is we don't know which one exactly it is, although so far in my research I have not seen anything that even points to the ending, other than the inference that it did involve the retrograde arc loop. So all I can say is, the best of our understanding as of today, November 13th, is that there's very strong theories and applications that the border is here somewhere in the retrograde in the days ahead. We just happen to pass the very first possible border. There's plenty more possibilities in the days ahead. And certainly with everything that we've been seeing going on in the world right now and the enemy activity at this time, we know we are at the time. We know we're at the season. And the enemy probably has more specific information. They probably know exactly which of these options it is more than we do. And they've been getting ready for this time. But we know just from this basic research that we know it's within the retrograde area somewhere. And we know we're at the time. When we look on Stellarium, Jupiter is underneath Virgo right now, not quite in the actual body of the woman shape of the constellation, and it has just a few more days before it'll enter. But when Jupiter reaches the second border option, when it'd be at the same degrees as when it will be at opposition, that'll be at 198. And so it's not even going to reach that till the 8th of December. And so there's still plenty of time before we even come to the next academic option. The time where we are at right now is very important because we have several prophetic markers pointing us to this time, telling us that this time is very important. Our knowledge of the border, we know we've just passed the very beginning, very first possible option for, but definitely we also can tell that there's plenty more options that are even stronger in the days ahead. So I wouldn't worry about the Shiloh prophecy necessarily. There's plenty to show that it's still ongoing and will be going on for quite a number more days too as well, based on Jupiter's division. And we're still going to do research on that. But it is interesting, it should catch our attention that the prophetic markers that we were told to look for, the peace and safety warnings, the days ahead, right in this window that we've been brought to with our knowledge, that is really what should be on our mind right now. Because that means the next picture, the woman with child, is starting. We could see that starting too. So our understanding of that, we know everything is on track. We just don't know some specific technical details. But we do know and see that everything is right on track. And of course we have the full moon going on right now, which reminds us of the specific prophecy we were told to look for. And when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads. And it's amazing that it's being tied to a celestial event in the heavens. So when we look up, we can see it and be reminded of it. And that also reminds us of the Judah and the Shiloh prophecy, reminding us that our Redeemer and our redemption is drawing nigh. And we have expectation because he also told us that he's going to be picking us up before destruction comes, during the days of Noah and Lot, before the flood. So the days ahead, just a few days ahead, are very important. We see multiple prophetic events coming together right here in just the days ahead. And so with all the craziness going on in the world, with all the enemy activity, we know this is a very important time. And so we should be lifting our eyes up. We should be setting our heart on things of eternity. Because we have so many things that Christ told us to look for and what we should be doing when we see it. Now on the 19th, that is when Jupiter is actually going to be entering the body of Virgo, the woman, the celestial signs. And so you could say the pregnancy cycle is starting then just by a visual approach. But when we look on the calendar, we could see that technically 2 weeks after that, during the time of Hanukkah, based on the calendar that we follow, technically from a biblical perspective, that is when Christ was conceived, and that is when the true biblical perspective pregnancy pattern would start. So just keep that in mind. The 19th is very significant because it is a visual event that we could see, and visually it would appear to be starting the pregnancy pattern. But from a biblical perspective, it'd be safer to say that the pregnancy is starting during the time of Hanukkah, which would not be too far after that anyway. And also note that there are two variations on the body of the Virgo constellation, 2 different connected dot outlines that are in play even today. And so just keep in mind that there is a biblical precedent for the pregnancy actually starting 2 weeks from that point. And I highly suggest that you download the event study calendar, print it out, and just use it as a great condensed study of what's coming together right now. And of course, the Shiloh booklet. We're going to try to update the booklet as we go forward with the astronomical information as we get it, and we'll let you know as we make updates to those particular sections. So what do we know? We know there's historical artifacts, there's actual tangible evidence for the perspective that we are using. And there's plenty of modern documentation that this is the perspective that is true of determining the boundaries. That they use Jupiter, the scepter, the lawgiver, the one who does determine the boundaries, the king, and this was used to determine the boundaries of the constellations too as well. And so this is very solid. We know this was done. We know it involved a retrograde motion. We even saw the Bible giving a nod to the retrograde motion and 10 degrees too as well. And the academic resources constantly talk about how the retrograde was used to measure 10 degrees. And this can be confusing because they talk about it's used to measure 10 degrees, which it is 10 degrees from station 1 to station 2, but that is really just a measurement, a ruler for 10 degrees. What we don't know is where exactly, which point, what station was used to be the actual boundary, what defined it. All we know is it's somewhere within the retrograde. Even the Encyclopedia Britannica says one theory is that it's at the offset. You'll see other articles that say it was at opposition when it was brightest. So we know what we know, and we know what we don't know. We do know that the boundary is determined somewhere in there. And it does appear a lot stronger that it's not at Station 2, obviously. And it does lean more toward Station 1 or opposition. But we're still going to do research. But we know what we know, and we know what we don't know. And that hedges in our understanding as we go forward. We know there's still plenty of time, there's still plenty of options based on the historic and academic information. And we also know that there are prophetic events coming together and celestial events coming together that are a whole lot easier to understand and things we are told to look for. So we have enough already to tell us that these few days ahead are extremely important. And so we must continue to go forward. We know what we don't know, but we know what we do know, and we do know a very lot. And so we're going to be like the wise men. We are going to continue to go forward. We're going to act on what we do know and continue to go forward, not afraid to ask questions. The wise men asked questions and they kept going forward. And so that's what we're going to do. We've heard the trumpet call of midnight. We've heard all the celestial signs. We've heard the calls for peace and safety. We've heard so much that tells us, go forward. The bridegroom cometh. Go ye out to meet him. So let us rise up. Let us trim our lamps. And let us go out to meet the bridegroom halfway. Serving Christ first and highest above all else. Maranatha.